We're going to get started. I'm Sue Kanoho, Executive Director of the Kauai Visitors Bureau, and special thanks to the County of Kauai and also to the Kauai Chamber of Commerce. Mark Perriello, where are you, Mark? Mark, say thank you, Mark, for your sponsorship of this. Nancy Kana from the Kauai Economic Development Board. And I know I've got some county representatives here. George Costa's supposed to be here, but I'm sure he'll be here soon. And our Fred Atkins is here from the Hawaii Tourism Authority as our board representative, so thanks, Fred, for coming. I also wanted, and I won't go through all the VIPs because there's plenty here, but I wanted to just say that last year, the Hawaii Tourism Authority had a Global Tourism Summit, and we attended, Fred and I, and many of my staff, and others. I think Joanne Yukimura was there, and Katie, did you go? I think you didn't make it. A few others were there, but I had the honor of hearing Olof speak, and it really, to what we are dealing with now in tourism, this really spoke to my heart, and I know it will to yours as well. So this is an opportunity to really hear what Iceland's been through and what we're kind of going through and where the corollaries are similar, and what maybe plant the seed for future opportunities for us down the road. So I'm going to read this very appropriate CV of hers, about 4 paragraphs. So, first with Olof Yrr Atladottir. Pretty good, Jeff. Was appointed Director General at ITB 2008 and held the position until the end of the year in 2017, and for 10 tumultuous years for the Iceland's tourism industry as well. During that period, she held the position of Vice President in charge of sustainability at the European Travel Commission 2015 to 2017, and was Chairman of the Board of NATA, the North Atlantic Tourism Association, twice. Olof has been a board member of Promote Iceland 2010 to 2013, Vice Chairman of the Board of, I didn't get this one, Vatnajökull National Park. Hawaiian's looking real good right now. And has sat on various boards and working groups on behalf of the Icelandic government. Previously, Olof was the managing director of the National Bioethics Committee of Iceland and Iceland's representative on the Steering Committee of Bioethics within the Council of Europe. In the autumn of 2017, she was appointed special advisor to the Secretary General of the UN WTO on Nordic Affairs. Recently, she accepted the position of Director for Tourism Strategy at the Royal Commission for Al Ula region in Saudi Arabia. Olof has 2 master's degrees in population genetics, that's what we're dealing with, and public administration, as well as 2 undergraduate degrees in Icelandic literature and statistical biology, and a diploma in developmental studies. She worked as a ranger in Iceland Highlands and national parks, and as an experienced hiking and adventure guide, and I've apologized profusely for the weather. And she said it's okay, she's been there before when she's done ranger work and it's pouring rain, so she can relate, but we're gonna have her back one time when it's really sunny and beautiful with her husband. So with that, I hope you enjoyed tonight's evening. Special thanks to everybody who came out tonight. I think it's really important for our future of Kauai, and I appreciate your time and energy. Aloha. Mahalo.
Sleep until the sun goes down. Hold your horses now. Through the woods we ride. Hold your horses now. Through the woods we ride. Hold your horses now. Through the woods we ride. Hold your
So, good evening. Thanks for having me. My name is Olof Yrr Atladottir. Very good, Sue. And I am the former, well, I seem to be the former almost everything, but the current Director for Tourism Strategy in Saudi Arabia, because talking about the weather, this is what Icelanders should do. After, spending 10 years in promoting bad weather, they should move somewhere where it's always sunny and dry. So anyway, I'm going to spend about, approximately the next hour or so talking to you about Iceland, which is good because I haven't been there for a while, showing some holiday snaps from my family, because I like that. It reminds me of them. And maybe discussing a bit how the development of tourism has been in Iceland for the past decade, how I experienced it, and how that has shaped my view on which way tourism has to go in the future. Now, this is me. This is my background. I am not a very good bureaucrat. I'm essentially a very bad bureaucrat. This is where I like to be. This is in the heartland of Iceland, just underneath a glacier in the start of a glacier river, where I have taken people for the past 3 years to wade in mucky water for about 24 hours just to see some small plants and snow, and they love it. So this is, so this is the heart of Icelandic tourism. It is being wet and uncomfortable and loving it. Because Iceland is a northerly island. It's the 18th largest island on Earth, about 103,000 square kilometers. And I'm sorry, I'm really bad at translating square meters to feet or whatever. About 68% of the country is above 300 meters above sea level and is defined as a wasteland or a desert. 12% is covered with glacier and only 23% is covered with vegetation, which is down from the time when the first settlers came about 1,100 years ago, because they found themselves in the middle of a little ice age when they came and didn't understand it when the trees didn't grow back after they cut them down. So that's what we've had to deal with, and also because it's a volcanic island, we have a very erosive soil structure, which means that we've had to deal with a lot of environmental problems, and that is something that tourism has had to take into account too. Now, the country is also almost a city-state. 70% of the population live in Reykjavik, or the capital area, with the rest of the 300,000 or so souls that live in Iceland dispersed around the country. This means that we have quite a lot of kings and queens, 300,000 people or so, who all know what's best for them and everybody else in the country, which sometimes makes for an interesting dialogue. But this also means that it's a lot of challenges for a lot of things that public policy is addressing. For example, the transportation system, all sorts of services, and that translates also into the development of tourism, as we'll get into a bit later. Now, when I started in January 2008, things were great. We were really rich. We were fiscal geniuses. We had figured out, somebody said that we had figured out some sort of new economic theory, which just, all the other idiots in the world had not just, they hadn't caught on. So we ate gold, and everything was fine, and it was a big, fat, long party, until October 2008, when it turned out that we were idiots. We were the idiots. Had taken all the money, we had borrowed it, basically, and then we were bankrupt. And people weren't very pleased about that. So from starting out in a position which was supposed to be a cushy inside job, we had to go into crisis mode. And that was not the last time we had to do that. But we started out, when you go bankrupt as a country, it teaches you humility. So we started out by reaching out to our friends and asking them to be nice to us. Which, was helpful because people were, which that was nice. And just when we had sort of started to get back on our feet, we had this nice eruption in the spring of 2010 in a small glacier called Eyjafjallajökull, which translates as Island Mountain Glacier, which is a very idiotic name and has a long story behind it, which I won't go into. But it was a fairly small eruption because we have eruptions, every 4 or 5 years. We've had 2 since this one. The thing was that the ash cloud that came out of it, because it was a glacial eruption, so we had a lot of ash, and the composition and the wind situation and everything made for us becoming, the world leader in grounding airplanes for 40 days. which put us on the map, and that was interesting too. But we had to reach out again. So we told people that we were having a bit of a volcanic eruption, but since we are very good at designing stuff, we had sort of designed all the towns around the coastline and all the volcanoes in the middle. So no one, was actually in danger except, the people that drove to see the volcano, which people do in Iceland all the time. They don't go away from volcanoes. They get stuck in traffic on the way home because so many people go to see them. We showed beautiful pictures of lava falls, and we apologized because that's, what we'd learned how to do after going bankrupt. We tried to send out good information and correct information because there was a lot of misinformation going around. And when the eruption finished, we just thanked everybody for the music, and we're very happy that we weren't on television every night. However, there was a bit of a problem since nobody was traveling anywhere, and Iceland had become sort of connected to troubles in travel. So we decided to show our real selves. The problem was that when you start marketing, and this is the good thing about 20/20 hindsight, you always see that afterwards, you sometimes make some mistakes that you wouldn't be caught dead making maybe 7 years later. So while you watch this video that I'm going to show now, I would like you to see if you see 3 mistakes that wouldn't make anybody happy today.
I can't stop my feet. Ebony and ivory and dancing in the street. Hey, it's 'cause of you. The world is in a crazy, hazy hue. My heart is beating like a jungle drum. But a dunk-a-dunk-a-dunk-dunk-dunk-dunk. My heart is beating like a jungle drum. Rock-a-dunk-a-dunk-a-dunk-a-dunk-dunk. My heart is beating like a jungle drum.
It's fairly easy. In the first place, you really don't stand on a glacier in the middle of a lagoon and dance because it usually topples regularly. So that is sort of suicide. And you shouldn't tell anybody to stand on a glacier either in the middle of a lagoon. If you dance on moss, then you're ruining the moss for the next 50 or 100 years or something because it doesn't have any root system. So it sort of just breaks off, and that's that. And in the third place, when you know you are going to have a lot of hot water, superheated water coming out of the air, you usually don't recommend standing just beside it. But it made for good footage, and it put us on the map, so that was great. And since 2011, which is sort of the year after the fairly small eruption with the very big consequences, we've had a lot of growth. We've had double-digit growth numbers of tourists every year. The first year was fairly small, only 16%. But after that, it has been around 20, and the year 2016, we had a 40% increase in visitors. This, in essence, saved Iceland economically from the bank crash, because we got a lot of money from the tourists. A lot of jobs were created, because after the bank crash, we had an unforeseen and unprecedented 12% unemployment in the country. So a lot of jobs were created. You can see that 1,000 companies were set up. Seasonality decreased from about half the people coming in June, July, and August, and down to less than 38%. And this has been a phenomenon economically. The tourism is the most important exporter of goods and services, and the most important importer of foreign currency, which is good, because we need that, because we're a small island with a very bad currency. And also, tourism is accounted for 8.4% of GDP 2016. So it is the most important industry in Iceland now, and it is also the provider of jobs, the creator of jobs, and the creator of GDP. Employment in tourism has risen. We see that in 2010, about 8% of the workforce were employed within tourism, and in 2016 it had gone up to, well, almost 13.5%. And we can also see from that picture that the jobs created in tourism were mainly outside of summer, because in the summer the job market is I mean, we have a lot of jobs in tourism in the summer, but they're being created outside of summer also, which means that we are getting more and more jobs that go all year round. And that is really important for tourism too, because it means that it becomes an industry where you can decide to have a career. You don't have to go on and off all the time. Now, accommodation has also been a challenge for tourism. If we look at July 2016 and 2017 and compare that, we see that around the country, hotel accommodation increased by 7% around the country and 5% in Reykjavik, where Airbnb accommodation increased by 84% versus 32%. Now, this has a very, simple explanation, because it takes a long time to build a hotel and get all the permits and, install all the toilets and everything. But it only takes you about 10 minutes to vacuum your floor for your first Airbnb guest, which means that it's much, much simpler to open up an Airbnb. And of course, that means that the people that are providing Airbnb, they are in essence providing a service. They are allowing for the growth. But at the same time, of course, they become a challenge, because you want them to participate in the industry. You want them to have some sort of quality standard. You want them to pay their taxes. And you also want to try and get a handle on the disparity in competitiveness, which comes from, just as a small example, comes from one entity paying property taxes according to it being an industry, and the other paying property taxes as according to it being a home. So there are a lot of challenges, but I think that this is something that countries and destinations will have to look at from a realistic point of view, because even if Airbnb were banned, it wouldn't stop, it would go underground. And also, Airbnb is not just a response to a lack of accommodation in hotels, it's a response to a want for different experiences. So there's something that we need to try and figure out, and of course many destinations are working on that. Now, the thing is that everybody's traveling, and I'm not going to go very deeply into this picture because it's mainly just the curve, because we are expecting 1.8 billion people to be traveling internationally in the year 2030. That is a lot of people that think that one of the bases and the foundations for their quality of life is to be able to travel across borders, or to be able to be a tourist. So this means that there's a lot of people going around also, and it means a profound change in basically everything that we think about, not least from a public policy point of view. But going back to Iceland for a moment, why do people go to Iceland? They definitely don't go for the weather. This is a picture I took in a summer holiday with even worse weather than yesterday, where I was hiking, and that's a waterfall, and it's actually going the wrong way. And this is like 10 seconds before it hit me in the face. So nobody comes to Iceland because of the weather. That is just a definitive. But people do come to Iceland because of general interest in nature. Iceland is a nature destination. But what I find interesting in the numbers that you see here is that people decide to come to Iceland or get the idea there from friends and relatives. They get the idea because somebody tells them that it's great to go to Iceland, which means that reputation is everything. Word of mouth is everything. And in the day of social media, you can ruin your reputation as quickly as you drink a glass of water or something. So it's really important that we keep our reputation up. And also, when you look at where people get their information, again, it is friends and relatives that play a very big role, although, of course, the internet is the largest provider of information. And the third part that I wanted to point out here is that even though nature and the landscapes of Iceland are the most prominent in people's minds after their visits, the people and hospitality are a close second. And that means, and that's not just the people that work in the industry, that's everybody. That's everybody you meet on the streets. That's the people that you sit beside in the restaurants. It's the people that you queue behind at the swimming pool. Because people are very, very important to tourism. Residents are very, very important to tourism. And if we lose their goodwill, then we have lost as a destination. And that's just a fact. That's just the way it is. Also, travelers are becoming more and more aware of a lot of things. people are becoming more seasoned travelers. We are no longer, my grandfather, when he traveled first to the Canary Islands, which became a thing in the 70s, Icelanders, suddenly found out that you could fly somewhere and the weather was warm, which was nice. But of course, you couldn't trust the foreigners. So usually people took with them some food, some smoked leg of lamb and some condensed peas in a jar, just in case there wasn't enough food in the foreign countries. And my husband's grandfather, he brought with him a coat because he had heard that you had to dress off the heat. And yeah, it was sometimes interesting to see the Icelanders of our grandfather's generations. But people, this is 2 generations ago, and people now, they are used to traveling. And they're used to getting what they want, and they want what they expect. So they want quality assurance. They want to know that what they paid for will meet their expectations. And we can't confuse quality with luxury, as some people do, because you can have a quality bed and breakfast or a quality hostel, and then you can have a crap 5-star hotel. You need to know what you're paying for and get what you're paying for, and then you're happy, even if it's expensive. And people are becoming more and more aware of that. Also, visitors, they know, and they realize, and they look, and they see through the jargon that you can sometimes have, because if I look at this picture where we asked people to rate activities and attractions according to their environmental practices, they had a very, very clear picture. They had seen that the energy utilization was fairly good, but they also realized that transportation was not very good. And even in this destination, with all this energy, all this hydroelectric power, all this geothermal energy, we were still using diesel to power up our buses. And we still didn't have a very good public transportation system. I remember one of the guides I worked with once walking past a row of buses in the morning and saying, "I love the smell of diesel in the morning," paraphrasing a famous motion picture. Because that is sort of the indicative smell of tourism in Iceland. That is when the cars are heating up and you feel the oil smell. And that is something that our guests see, and so that is something that we are challenged to try to change, for example. And what do visitors want? Of course, they want to be secure. They want to have something that feels authentic. Even though none of them would like to come home with me on a Thursday evening and eat boiled fish and watch TV, they want an authentic experience, something that they can relate to as being something that they could maybe see other people in Iceland doing. And they're meeting real people, and they're having something that feels real. They also want hospitality, and both from, of course, people that get paid to be nice to you, which is, good. I like, I always like that, paying people to be nice to me because it means that I can be sure of it. But however, you also want the people that you meet on the street to be nice to you. You want to feel welcome. You also want the quality, as I discussed before. You want people to know what they're doing, especially if they're driving with you across a glacier somewhere. So you want professionalism. And, of course, you want enthusiasm. Because the one thing, you can be a really bored fish producer, and you can be a really, really bored hospital worker, and you can even be a really bored teacher. But if you're a really bored tourism provider, and that reflects in your attitude towards your customers, then you're also dead in the water. You have to love what you do, every moment of it. And that can sometimes be a challenge. When I was a ranger in the mountains of Iceland, I always remember in June, I was really enthusiastic, going, "Hey, what can I do for you?" And in August, it was like, yeah, it's over there. But we are doing okay, and that's great. In Iceland, we score highly on this scale, which is called the Net Promoter Score, which is an index that is calculated fairly simply, and that has been used more and more to get comparable statistics about how people like their stay, and it's used also for other products than tourism. And as I say, we score fairly highly, or very highly, and that is good. So we're doing something right, and that is very good because we are our own biggest critics. I don't know how it is on your island, but as I told you in the beginning, we have like 330,000 kings and queens in Iceland. Everybody knows how you should be doing it, and everybody hates how you are doing it. So so everybody sort of argues, and we are very good at arguing. We can argue, we can argue the hell out of everything for 3 decades. We haven't figured out a fee structure for tourism attractions in Iceland, even though we talked about it for about 35 years, because the argument is really good, and then then we can't be bothered anymore because something else comes up. So that means that in 3 years' time we have to start arguing again, and then things have changed. So we just argue. So we never actually do anything. We just talk about what we should be doing. No, I'm joking a bit. But because Iceland is doing well. In 2016, we had a 7.5% increase in GDP. Last year, we had only, which is still very healthy, a 3.6%. From an unemployment rate of 13% almost after the bank crash in 2008, we are circling around 1 to 2%. So basically, we have enough jobs to go around, and we have to import people, or we have to ask people to be so nice as to move to Iceland to be able to work within, for example, tourism, so that we can keep things working. And thank goodness we are lucky, because people still seem to want to live in Iceland, coming from countries with better weather. So I hope they get back home for the summer vacation some. But anyway, so we're very lucky in that. We've been fortunate. And we're also scoring very highly in all sorts of international comparisons. We have the highest country employment rate in the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We rank number 9 on the Human Development Index. We have the 8th highest average wages in US dollars, or had in 2015. We rank number 3 on the Social Progress Index, but we rank 25th in tourism competitiveness. And that is also because of the pricing, because everything has become very, very expensive. And that is interesting, because everything has become very, very, very expensive, well, mainly because of tourism. Because we have this small currency, which is called the Icelandic krona, or Íslenska krónan. It is one of the smallest independent currencies in the world, so it fluctuates wildly. And we would never have believed 10 years ago that tourism would have the influence to strengthen the Icelandic krona in such a way that it has a profound influence on all pricing and everything in Iceland. So how does the average Joe in Iceland feel about tourism? Because everything is great, right? You saw all the economic indexes and all the statistics that I was throwing at you. I mean, we're doing really, really well. So everybody's probably really, really happy, and nobody is negative towards anything. Now, the thing is that tourism has a lot of challenges now. Maybe 20 years ago, we didn't think about tourism in the same way as we do now. I mean, at least in Iceland, politicians love tourism. They love to talk about tourism, because basically tourism was this sort of organic industry that, somebody has his idea and he opens up a bed and breakfast, and that's great. That's really great, because he just does that, and then people come and they're really happy, and the bed and breakfast owner is really happy, and then somebody just opens up a horse rental, and that's great too, and everything's great, and everybody's happy, and the best part is that the government doesn't have to do anything. It doesn't have to build a bridge, it doesn't have to build a harbor, it doesn't have to have any policies, it doesn't have to plan, it doesn't have to think about how it affects other industries, because, everybody's just happy, and building B&Bs, and, just doing their stuff, and nobody complains. But since then, we have learned that tourism is a very, very planning-intensive industry. You have to think about everything, because you have to have a framework, and things have to work on so many levels. So you need to have holistic destination development, because also you need to think about responsibility issues and sustainability issues, because despite what people believed maybe 10, 15 years ago, tourism isn't the great white savior of societies, which just brings all the sustainability and organic stuff everywhere. Tourism can be just as unsustainable as every other industry, and can have a profound effect on the environment. Also, what has changed is that, as I said before, we have this more seasoned traveler. And everybody's traveling anyway, so you don't really have to encourage people to travel, just to travel. You have to encourage them within a destination where to go, so you don't get, all sorts of congestion problems, for example, and how to travel. And as I said somewhere, I think, sometime, maybe we don't need more prosperous tourists, or we don't need more tourists. Sometimes we really just need better tourists. And that is just a fact, and I'll come back into that now. And I love visitors, you know, so I'm not being overly critical of them, but we do need to think about how do we want our guests to behave. Because basically, they're visiting me. So if I want them to take their shoes off before they walk into my living room, then they should just do that. Shouldn't they? Now, we have to create experiences, and also at the same time, we have to create this feeling of independence because people want to be independent travelers. When I was starting out as a ranger in the 1990s, everybody traveled on a bus, and then they came up to the highlands where I was, and they camped and put their tents up. And then in the morning, they brushed the snow off the tents, and then they had to make their own breakfast. People don't want to do that anymore. People want more service, but they still want to feel really, really independent. They're not being herded. They don't want to be tourists, you know. They want to be visitors. And also, instead of thinking, what can we do to promote or to build up tourism in our destinations, we need to ask new questions. We need to ask questions like, what impact do we want tourism to have on our societies? What impact do we want tourism to have on our environment, our community, on the way residents feel, because feelings are important, and on the way that visitors perceive the destination, because visitors change the destinations for other visitors. So that's also a circle that we need to think about. So it's a lot of planning and a lot of thought that have to go into creating a good destination. Because tourism is sort of special. And it's different, I believe, from any other industry. Because we have this multifaceted direct relationship with the natural environment, of course, because that is, at least in Iceland, what we're basing our industry on, and also with the residents' daily lives. And it's a communication between the visitor and the host, the people that live there, the residents. And they're always the consumers are always in direct contact with the product, if you will, and we are the product, in essence. We live there. People are coming to visit us also. So sometimes you can maybe take a comparison with fish, because, I mean, a sailor can go out to sea and he can go and fish a fish, and then he brings the fish to shore, and then that fish goes into a factory, and it's, you know, they do stuff with it. Now, I'm very bad at fish, you know, people laugh at me when I try to take bones off a fish. I don't even know what it's called. And you know, and then the fish is just in the factory, and then everybody goes home, and the fish does not sit at your favorite coffee shop at your table. The fish doesn't ask for directions or anything. The industry is there, and your life is there. Whereas in tourism, it's all over the place. The tourism is just, you know, it's sort of immersing itself in every aspect of society, and that's fine. But it also, we have to remember that residents, they are emotionally attached to their environment, both natural and cultural, and that is important too. And we have to, in Iceland, we sometimes had this discussion between very wise men in suits, about 60 years old, who looked at people and said, oh, that is just an emotional response that you're having. You know, like that didn't matter. But emotional responses matter because emotional responses are what sort of rule our lives often. So as I say, we can throw statistics at people until we're blue in the face and tell them how everything is really, really great. But if people just don't perceive it, then they'll just go, I don't care. I mean, why is he in my chair? That's my coffee shop. And then you can tell him that the coffee shop wouldn't exist except for the tourist, and he'll go again, I don't care. I'm just bugged. I'm not feeling it. I feel irritated. And then we have to have a dialogue that is based on respect also, and not just talk top down and try to tell people how everything is really, really, really great. Now, what are tourism's resources? What do we use? We use nature, as I say. Iceland is a nature destination. We use culture, and we want the culture to be real, but we still don't want the visitors to sort of permit it and change it. We use, as an industry, tourism is really dependent on all sorts of public infrastructure, public goods, the road system, the transportation system, which is usually built for the residents, but then suddenly a lot of people are using it, and they're not at home watching TV every night. No, they're outside driving on the roads that were made for the people that are at home watching TV. So there's a lot of load on a lot of public services, and also that becomes then a resource, and then the discussion starts. How How should we pay for all that? And also, as I say, one of the main resources of tourism is the people and the society. Now, if we go into nature and natural attractions, we need to try and figure out how we can ensure a constructive discourse between conservation and tourism, because tourism can be very negative for conservation. It is not the savior of conservation, as some people maybe thought in Iceland 10 years ago. Now, Iceland has this image as a pure and unspoiled destination, but we still have overcrowding at popular places. We have, no people at many places. It's a very large island with few people, after all. And even though we have a lot of visitors, as we saw in the statistics, it still means that in the wintertime we have maybe 15,000 or 20,000 people on average every day extra in the country, in a large country. And in the summer we do have maybe around 80,000 people extra every day, which is, a fourth. So it's a 25% increase in the population, in essence, during the summer. So we have overcrowding at popular places. We have trampling of natural vegetation, and as I said, the volcanic soil of Iceland is really, really easily erodable. So we have environmental overload and pollution, because as everybody who's run a hotel knows, there's a lot of phosphor. There's a lot of nitrous that goes into the water and the water systems. So there's a lot of things that we need to think about just from that point of view. And besides, I talked about the diesel before, and that can't be good for the environment, can it? And also we have to discuss the conflicts with other industries, because tourism isn't the only industry in Iceland, even though it's the biggest one. And it means that we all have to try and get along, and we're all using basically the same resources at the end of the day. Now, we're really bad at long-term planning in Iceland. For long-term planning, for us, is just deciding whether we should go to the bar on a Friday. That's it. Which is probably one of the reasons behind the bank crash in 2008. But we have found out that we need long-term planning, a lot of planning, as I was saying, and design. You need to develop new attractions and new products, if you will. And that's something that doesn't just happen by itself. You need to sort of think about that also. You need environmental accreditation, and you need to zone. You need all sorts of zoning. One thing, just as another anecdote, that we realized a couple of years ago was that you can have overload just from noise pollution. Because you can have, for example, in backcountry skiing, you can have people that pay a lot of money to take the helicopter up to the mountains and then ski down. And then you have the other people who also paid good money, and a large proportion of their hard-earned wages, to come to Iceland to walk up the hill and then ski down. And now you need to sort of figure out that these people can't really be together. So suddenly you have different modes of transportation that just come into conflict with each other. I noticed here when I was moisturizing my skin here in Kauai, outside, the day before yesterday, that you have a lot of signs where you forbid drones. And I think that's a new issue also. That's maybe just 3-4 years old. I mean, who would have thought that that would become an issue? But it is. And it's both from the in-your-face point of view, but also from the noise pollution. Because people, and I can't remember how often I've been hiking with people somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Iceland, and just as I've said, just listen to the silence. Then you hear, and then the helicopter follows you for the rest of the day, and that's really irritating. You go, sorry, and then you feel bad because you feel much worse than, due to the weather, because you somehow feel at fault. Now, culture is also very important, and sometimes people that live in a place which is full of guests, they feel trodden upon. They feel that the guests have become an infringement on their daily life because they don't feel that they can go about their daily routines, and that is something that you need to address. You have crowding out effects where maybe because of pricing, but maybe also just because the tourists are always there and ready, people don't feel, they feel crowded out. They don't feel that they have accessibility to their own spaces anymore. You also see sometimes that the destinations start producing for tourists, so they start faking it, and they lose their own identity, which makes the residents then also irritated. And this is all very, very important to address when you're planning, because at the end of the day, you are going to stay here, most of the time, except when you're a visitor somewhere else, and you want to feel, you want to be able to feel yourself. And that is also a very important thing that I think hasn't been researched enough. Now, I said that already. I just like this picture. It's of my little tent up in the Highlands. So welcome to look at that again, sorry. Services and professionalism. It turns out that quality makes long-term business sense. But of course, when there's a lot to do, then you don't really have time to, to bother with the quality assurance system, because that's a lot of work. But I think that that's something that people need to do, and they need to make the time to have an objective quality assurance, just to know what they're doing and what their business plan is based upon. Now, Iceland has positioned itself as a modern, safe, environmentally aware destination. So again, we need to do something about that stupid diesel, because our guests will, if we don't deliver on what people perceive us as when they're looking at the ads about Iceland, then it'll take them like 5 minutes to become negative sometimes. And it's very important that we work against that. Also, we need innovation in tourism, because we need to be able to let people utilize our senses. Because if we think of it, because now I'm being really critical of tourism, but if we think of it, think how lucky we are to work in an industry that is basically a dating program. People are meeting other people all the time. I just had a great guide this morning on an ATV tour, and he was saying, he loved this job because also it meant that he got to meet people from all over the place. And think how wonderful that is, both to be able to visit somebody and to be able to receive people. And in the age of what some people perceive as a rising age of xenophobism, and being afraid of other people, think about the open doors that tourism has and how important it is that we keep on working on that. Because today, people want more and more participatory experiences. They don't want to be reactive. They want to live the things themselves, and they want to be participating in their own experience. And they are increasingly self-sufficient, as I said. They want to be able to feel that they're really independent. Now, there are a lot of impacts on society. I touched upon the currency impact, but also the public services, because suddenly when you have 80,000 people extra 3 months of the year, a 25% increase in the population 3 months of the year, every day, it means that the public services, they have a lot more to do. And that is a cost, and it's a question of supply also, because also, if everybody's starting to work in the tourism industry, you don't have enough nurses, just as an example. So there's a lot of things that can impact society, and I don't think that maybe policymakers have realized until now how profound that impact is on almost every aspect of government, every aspect, whatever you call it. An increase in tourism will have an impact on everything that the public does. Now, human resources, it means that, if everybody can work in tourism, it means that you won't have enough people working in other sectors, and of course you want other sectors also. And that means that you have to have an influx of new residents. And that also comes into policy planning, because if you're going to welcome the new residents who are, at the end of the day helping you out, and they want to move to Iceland where the weather is really bad, just to help you out in your industries, and they come and they have their families, so the families need housing, and the kids need school, and there's a lot of societal immersion that has to go on, because also, as a tourism provider, you don't want somebody to come and not know anything about the destination. So you somehow have to let the people feel that they're a part of the society that they're working on introducing to other people. And that means that you really have to work really hard on being welcoming to them also. And that is, again, a stretch for public policy makers, because the school system is not made for that. That's just the way it is. So you need to be innovative in that approach also. Now, hospitality is one of Iceland's main strengths. However, we are challenged with a very, very bad road system and a very bad public transportation. So even if we are very welcoming, then we have really big challenges that people are experiencing in Iceland as our guests. And at the same time, the residents are seeing impacts on all sorts of things, on housing. Suddenly, young people can't move away from home until they're 45, which is really irritating for parents. My eldest is going on 17, and I've started to count down the days. And I have 4. We'll never be alone. So, and that has become a profound difficulty, because, where do housing prices go up? Yes, they go up in the central parts of the city, where the young people traditionally want to live, because young people tend not to want to live in the suburbs somehow. And at the same time, these are the places that, for example, are rented out as Airbnb lodgings, and the places where, where you want to have your businesses also. So you get this disparity between that. Real estate prices go up, the availability of services goes up, public services, as I said before, and this feeling of not owning your space anymore, because everybody is everywhere, because some person came and went to your secret garden somewhere, and he took a picture and he posted it on Instagram, and suddenly 10,000 people want to go there, and nobody planned for that. So there's no parking, and there are no paths, and there's nothing there, and you can't go there anymore because it's just been ruined. So those are a lot of things that are going on with people, and all these things are very, very relevant. So what do Icelanders think? We can see a very big difference between 2014 and 2017 in how people perceive the number of visitors. A lot more people in the summer think that they are far too many, and a lot less people in the winter think that they are rather too few. So that is something that we need to address also, because we need to have a balance between these things. Now, also, we can see that when asked about the impacts of tourism on things like nature, a lot more people are becoming skeptical. A lot more people say that they don't realize that the job creation effect, they just close out on that, because that is a fact. It's not sort of a feeling. Jobs have been created and are being created all over the country for tourism. And that is really good, because obviously that means that more people can live where they want to live and don't have to go chase jobs elsewhere. But a lot less people say that they realize this, for example. So people are becoming more skeptical, maybe because of some inner feeling, maybe, which I think is a fact, because of media coverage, because media likes negative news more than positive news somehow. Never understood that, but anyway. So we have this more negative perception. And if you look at the fact that residents are tourism maybe main resource, that becomes worrisome. Because when it comes to marketing, we have a bit of a challenge here. Now, if we want to market something, let's say butter, it's fairly, it's not rocket science. You can be good at it and bad at it, obviously. But basically, you do your market research, you do your product development, you see your market penetration. The consumers either like or dislike the product that you're marketing. However, the cow, who is the originator of the product, doesn't really care if you sell the butter in foil or wrapping or red paper or yellow paper. If you lie and say that the cow just ate nectar her whole life when she was hay-fed, the cow doesn't care. It just, goes on producing milk. However, when it comes to marketing tourism, the picture becomes much more complicated. Because obviously you have to market the product, that is the destination, to the consumer, which is the intended visitor. But at the same time, you have to market the consumer to the product. You have to market the guests to the residents, because they have to like people coming, and they have to like the way the destination is marketed, because if they are negative towards that, if they perceive the way that the destination is narrated in a negative way, then you're also dead in the water. That is another holiday snap. That's my family. Haven't seen them for a long time. Hi. Because at the end of the day, people visit people, not just phenomena. I was discussing with Joy here just before we started the possible impact of virtual reality on tourism. And obviously, you can put on your goggles and then you can suddenly be in the middle of a glacier in Iceland. However, I don't think that will ever knock tourism dead in the water, because people are going to visit people. They're coming to see something and feel on their own skin, and they're coming to have a dialogue. They're coming to have a connection with other people. So the residents' attitudes are all important for the visitor experience. And the product development has to be on the residents' terms. They have to participate in that process. So what did Iceland do? And I'll go very quickly, because this is sort of what we did in the last 10 years while I was in office. In 2009, when everybody was broke and didn't have any money, we decided that it could be nifty to try and look into the quality issues while people had a bit of time. And we constructed a quality system which is sort of all-encompassing. It has 26 categories and for everything except accommodation, and then 6 for accommodation, because we wanted to look at quality from an objective point of view. The system is a star grading system for accommodation, but it's sort of a pass or no pass system for all the other tourism services. And it has an attached environmental system because we wanted to build up the recognition of the fact that quality can't come without environmental and social responsibility. We based it upon a system in New Zealand called Qualmark, and we have been very happy to see that more and more companies are latching onto it now, and it has become something that the tour operators abroad have started to ask for. Now, we also played a role and have played a role in environmental infrastructure and planning. And for me, one of the largest learning curves I went through was this issue of planning. That's why I'm always talking about it, because it was sort of a new world that opened up to me, and a really, really interesting world. We manage the Tourism Site Development Fund. You can see here that even though we don't assess it regionally, it sort of spreads out around the country. And we also were very much, in 2012, we focused a lot on data and research. We opened up our surveys so everybody could get the data. We asked our guests a lot of questions about how they perceived their visit. We asked Icelanders also on how they perceive tourism in Iceland. We asked them what they're going to do, although it doesn't really matter because we're so few. But anyway, so tourism in Iceland is first and foremost an export industry. We supported a lot of carrying capacity studies, which were conducted by the universities. And we asked the industry itself. We developed a barometer to sort of try and see how they were perceiving the industry. So we're trying to build up a full picture of what is happening. And also we can count people. That is a good thing about being on an island. You can sort of count people in and out and see and ask them where they come from. And one of the things that we were very proud of was that we GPS mapped tourism resources. So people could layer the resources on top of each other and try and figure out where something was lacking, use it for strategic purposes. So they could sort of, if they wanted to go into product development in combination with other regions or something, then they could sort of look at this from a very, very objective point of view. As a former biologist and geneticist, I believe in measuring things. So we thought that it could be fine for people to be able to look at this very, very objectively and have a picture of how things fitted together. Now, in 2013, we addressed the legislative framework and licensing. We wanted to simplify it, so we've been working on opening up a portal where people, because one of the things that becomes complicated for people, and what you want to do, you want things to be simple for people so that it's more simple to abide by the law than it is to break it. That is sort of, I think, a very basic thing. So one thing we wanted to do, we wanted to get people not to have to run around 64 different agencies, because a lot of people like to have sort of a mixed tourism. They have a guest house and a horse rental, and and then they drive a minivan or something. And we wanted people not to have to run around and with a photocopy of the same papers to try and get all the licenses together, and then just give up on the last part and go home. This has proven profoundly difficult because even though everybody's really positive, nobody actually wanted to give me any money to do it, which is sort of, the bane of public service sometimes. But I'm hoping that, I think that in the last fiscal budget, some money was allotted to this because I think that it is very important. Also, the industry is sometimes a bit schizophrenic because at the same time as it calls out, understandably, for a simplification of the regulatory environment, they also want a higher threshold. So not every Tom, Dick, and Harry can just put on their hat and start running around with horses to everybody's danger. And that is something that is also very important because you want somehow to ensure that people are safe, especially within an activity and nature-driven destination. So, and also, since 2013, we have had all these new challenges. We have tried to legislate Airbnb, by putting a cap on the number of days that people can rent out an extra apartment, but at the same time making it more simple for people to register, so in the hopes that they register and pay their taxes. But obviously, I mean, if you're renting out your house for 11 out of 12 months, then you're no longer renting out your spare room. You're in effect running a hotel. And then you should, pay taxes according to that. We have the challenges of professionalism, because when the industry grows as much as it does, then, I mean, if you want to keep up the standards, you have to somehow try and address the issues that are pertinent to that. And then many people have wanted to legislate quality. I myself have been a bit skeptical towards that, because there are so many quality systems, and many of them are excellent, that I'm not sure that you can legislate directly by making it mandatory to be part of a quality system. However, you can go by it indirectly by making it mandatory for certain businesses to provide certain knowledge to their, for example, tour guides, and B, having rules of conduct within national parks. So I think that in many ways we need to be a bit clever in how we address issues without being overly regulatory also. Now, and finally, there's regional development, because Iceland, as you saw, is almost a city-state. 70% of the people in the country live around Reykjavik. So what we wanted to do was to sort of help the regions to develop holistically, and we embarked upon a countrywide mission of destination management planning, which is this holistic planning, and it is not rocket science either. I mean, what you basically want to do is you want to figure out where you are. So you want to, measure where you are and what you have. You want to decide where you want to be in, let's say, 5 years, and then you want to figure out the ways in which you go about doing that. And you want to have this holistic picture of how you go about that. So you have to be able to ask everybody, and you have to be able to assess the environmental conditions surrounding that. Now, these have been worked out now, and we're expecting them the plans themselves to be finalized this year. And then it comes to the fact that then you need to allot responsibility for the actions that are defined within it, and people have to be willing to work on that, because, as it says on the bottom of the slide, a DMP is a dynamic, never-ending process. It has to be reiterated, and somebody has to work on it. Now, in the years that have gone on since the Promote Iceland agency was founded in 2010, because one thing that happened in 2010, besides the stupid volcanic eruption, was that we decided to split up the Icelandic Tourist Board, which then became responsible for destination management, in essence, and move the foreign marketing to a new agency, which would then be responsible for all public promotion of all export industries. And it's very interesting to see how they have sort of followed also the trends and what has been happening within tourism in Iceland. So in 2010, we had crisis management, because we did the Moss and Iceberg video to try and get people to travel. In 2011 and 2012, we wanted to increase the interest in Iceland as a destination outside of the summer in order to decrease seasonality. In 2013 and 2015, we added a will to increase commerce, because it turned out that people were spending a bit less, maybe because everything was more expensive. And we wanted people to travel further around Iceland, not just stay in the congested areas. And in 2016, we added the question of responsible travel behavior, trying to call out the guests on their own responsibilities. So where do we go from here? We had a discussion in 2015 where we were discussing the fact that everything is pertinent to tourism, as I said before. Tourism touches upon every aspect of human endeavor. But these ministries, for example, they weren't really participating in any discussions, and there seemed to be sort of a wall between them. So we made a roadmap for the next 5 years, intended to sort of lay a foundation so we could make a future vision into the future. Because a fast-growing industry like tourism had been, of course, we sat with a lot of challenges because of the fast rate of growth, and because nobody had sort of thought about planning for tourism before tourism started to grow. So we established a whole-of-government task force, which has been done, for example, in Australia, I know, with very interestingly there. But since we always have to do stuff sort of our own way, we decided to involve the industry and local government also, which has been good because it's opened up the very necessary dialogue between these three entities. And it sort of forces everybody to the table, so they have to discuss things. Now again, nothing rocket science-y about tourism. I mean, what we want to do is that we want to build a basis to increase profitability, increase skills and quality within the industry, have more reliable data, coordinate, as the whole-of-government approach is witness to, increase the distribution of tourists around the country, enhance nature conservation, and basically just ensure a positive visitor experience. And now in 2018, Iceland will be going finally through a long-term policy and strategy planning. So now we're going to try and see if, since 2008, we have learned to think, sort of have a long think about what we want to do with the future. So it's sort of a destination management plan on a national scale. And I, for one, am very excited to see how that turns out. But one thing we want to do is you can't really start talking about the responsibility of your visitors without trying to inform them. And in the day and age of search machines, we of course try to invent our own.
I'm Guðmundur.
I'm Guðmunda.
Hi, I'm Guðmundur.
Guðmundur.
Guðmunda.
Guðmundur.
In here is 40 degrees.
This is one of the hottest restaurants in Reykjavik. Takk fyrir.
Welcome to the biggest forest in Iceland.
This is the most powerful hot spring in all of Europe.
I'm Guðmunda of Reykjavik.
My name is Guðmundur. Hey! Guðmundur!
Guðmunda.
Guðmundur!
And as I say, responsibility is sort of the catchphrase here and the key word. How do we delegate responsibility in order to ensure sustainability? And these concepts have sort of been put together in the past few years because it turned out that sustainability is sort of a difficult concept because it makes everybody responsible for everything. And if you look at the definitions here, where you have all these long, good texts talking about environmental resources and ecological processes and contributions to culture and fair distribution of benefits. I mean, who defines this and who is responsible for making that happen? Because the thing is that if everybody is responsible, then nobody's really responsible, is it? Because everybody can point to everybody else. So, and also, nobody can be responsible for everybody else's actions, but we can all be responsible for our own actions, can't we? So responsible tourism is sort of a way to involve the assuming of responsibility to ensure that our own business decisions and activities participate in creating a sustainable destination. This means that we have to think about how do my actions ensure the fair dispersion of the dividends to those that bear the burdens. That is, if I run a company in Reykjavik and send everybody to the south coast, how do I ensure that the people of the south coast don't just get all the bother and the trash, but they also get some of the benefits? And we need to think about this from a more ethical point of view. I think ethics and tourism have not been discussed enough. And we also need to show, maybe everybody needs to show a bit more respect to each other. And as I said before, we can no longer just ask what should we do to bolster tourism. We have to ask what impact do we want tourism to have on our societies, our communities, and our environment. In essence, we need to manage tourism instead of being managed by it. Now, I'm just going to run over this slide. The thing is that you can't outsource responsibility. You can define the different stakeholders like that, and you can make up a matrix, and then you fill up where the responsibility lies on a broad scale, and then you can define what responsibility do tourism providers have towards the environment. And you just define it. What do I, as a tourism provider, what responsibility do I have? And then you can just write it down, and it can become objective. Because obviously tourism providers, for example, they have a responsibility towards the environment. Their actions matter. Hotel owners' actions matter. The way that they manage their laundry matters. The way that the tourism guide talks about Iceland's nature matters. The way that they behave towards the infrastructure itself, the road system, the public goods that they are utilizing, it matters. And the way that they behave towards residents, as it's turned out, matters a lot, because it turns out that when asked, the residents of Iceland, they were not irritated the tourists, the visitors were not irritating them. It was often the tourism providers and the way that they behaved towards the society. And then obviously they have an impact on visitors' experiences. Over 300 companies in Iceland have signed this responsible tourism pledge. And of course, it's just a signing of something. It doesn't translate into any mandatory actions, but it does mean that the dialogue has been opened. And at the same time, it is very much connected to the quality system, VAKIN, that I discussed before. And also, the Tourism Association has signed the UN Code of Ethics for tourism, which means that the awareness level is always rising. Now, if we look at government, national and local, I mean, government, since tourism is built upon public goods and public services and public treasures, obviously they have a responsibility everywhere, and they need to define it from the different aspects of government. Just as the tourism, the hotelier can look at, for example, his laundry and say, I have a responsibility here, and this is what I'm going to do, then the government has to define also where their place in the whole picture is, because they can't be doing everything either. They're not responsible for everything. They're responsible for certain aspects, but they need to be willing to figure out how to pay for those things also, for example. Now, the residents, because they are the most important resource, they are also responsible. They're responsible for thinking about what the government should do, because they are taxpayers, but they are also responsible in the way that they maintain their own infrastructure, also under the respect that they show it. They're responsible towards their own attitudes. We are all responsible for the way that we feel towards our outlook in life. And at the end of the day, they are really, really responsible for the visitors' experiences, because the visitors can't perceive, as I've said like 100 times probably already, the visitors perceive a destination from the way that they're treated by the people that live there. And thank goodness, the residents of Reykjavik, they're still very proud. The green stuff, this is Icelandic. It's a very simple language. So you can just read this yourself. No, I'm joking. I just don't have the technological know-how to translate the slides, and put them up there. But anyway, the green bits are the people that are proud to live in a tourism destination. And that is really, really good. So even if we see the warning signs, we still see that a majority of people are still of the belief that tourism and visitors in our community, they increase the quality of life rather than decrease it. And that is really, really good. Now, finally, the visitors, they have a really, really big responsibility. They have a responsibility in how they behave towards the environment in which they are walking or conducting themselves. They have a responsibility in which way they address questions of infrastructure. For example, if you're in a road system that you don't know, you have to treat it with respect. As I say, if you're in somebody's house, you have to take off your shoes if people want that, because they, at the end of the day, are also very responsible for the way that residents perceive the guests, and also, of course, in the way that other visitors perceive the destination, and the way that it changes due to your own behavior. Now, Iceland has invited the prospective visitors to sign this pledge, where people pledge to be responsible and take responsibility for their own actions while they're visiting the destination. And I think that's a good thing. I think 50,000 people have signed it. They go through this thing on the internet, and then they sign it. And even if it's only talk and it's only words, it's still a dialogue, and you still have to take it to heart a bit. And just the discussion of this pledge has meant that people are more aware of how you have to behave when you come visit us in Iceland. And since everybody's traveling, this opens up this opportunity for destinations to define how you need to behave. And because you don't have to try and welcome everybody, disregarding how they behave, you can sort of set the standards for how people should behave when they visit you. And that's the good thing about the growth in global tourism, because you can set rules.
Hello, my name is Guðmundur. Welcome to Iceland Academy. In today's class, we'll be talking about one of our favorite activities, hot tubbing. We take hygiene very seriously, and everyone is required to take a shower before entering the pool area. So, remember the little rhyme? Heads, armpits, crotch and toes, crotch and toes. Head, armpits, crotch and toes, crotch and toes. Head, armpits, crotch and toes. There we have it, squeaky clean. Now, on with the butter. Hot tubs are very important to the Icelandic people. In here, we are all equal, and no topic is off limits. So come to Iceland, where you feel nice, warm, and relaxed.
The issue is about bathing behavior. That's really important to Icelanders. That's the thing. People think that it's not worth it, but that is something that Icelanders take very much to heart if you don't. So we are living the era of the traveler. People are traveling all over the place, all over the world. New destinations are opening up. And we have to stop thinking like Dirk Gently did. When he used to latch in the book, the Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, he told his friend how he latched on to cars that seemed to know where they were going. And as he said, he rarely ended up where he was going to go, but he often ended up somewhere he needed to be. Now, we can't think that way about tourism anymore, because in the first place, our responsibility is global. Tourism is a global industry with a profound global effect. And it will be meaningless to discuss the future of tourism if we don't address issues like climate change, because the way that tourism is behaving now, and this is according to a study made for the European Travel Commission, I mean, we will either have to travel less or paddle more, because the other way is not going to work. We need to think about resource utilization, because that is also, tourism uses up a lot of resources. We need to think about human rights and workers' rights, because that is something that is coming up all over the world. And we need to think about our own behavior as guests. There was an Australian research project, a psychology project, and its results showed that when outside of your own social norms, where you can, where everything will, at the end of the day, get back to your mother, that is where, when you get outside, that is why you would never run naked down a street in your hometown. But when you come to Italy and nobody knows you, then you find it's perfectly all right, especially when fueled by like 62 beers. And this is psychologically proven to be the case. When outside of your social norms, you think that you can behave more badly. And that means that we are not there yet as a species. We are not global enough. We're not thinking globally enough. And if we don't get a handle on this, then the future of travel will maybe become least of our worries. Because this is not where we, in essence, want to end up. We don't want to end up at the top of a mountain with the only way going down. We do want to end on a plateau, because that way we can sort of wander around for the future. Because the thing is that tourism has brought about a shift in paradigm for societies. I think it's the most profound societal change since the Industrial Revolution. In essence, communities don't anymore, they don't consist only of residents. They consist of residents and temporary residents, all together, mixed together, each with its own needs, each with its own rights, and each with its own responsibilities. And public policy and planning has to take this into account. At the same time, responsible tourism requires cooperation, and sometimes it requires sort of inner cooperation, because the fact is that we will all be playing dual roles for the rest of our lives. We will sometimes be the visitors, and sometimes we'll be the hosts. And we need to find a way to combine this sense of self into something holistic, so we stop behaving badly when we're outside of our norms. So we need to set a new course, which means that we need to figure out where we have to be and not latch on to the next car passing by. And I'm hoping that maybe you can open the video. The last one? So we don't get a lag. So finally, if you want to visit us in Iceland, I'm going to show you a short video which also teaches how you should be dressing.
Hi, I'm Stina. Welcome to Iceland Academy. In today's class, I will be showing you how to pack for Iceland to stay warm and happy. You see, our weather is constantly changing, so that's why it's important to wear layers. Let's start with some thermals and some good shoes, a fleece, some waterproofs. A lot of people think that jeans are fine, but if it rains, they'll stick to you like an octopus and keep you wet and cold. So you are actually just better off in your underwear. And strictly no high heels, unless you go into one of our fancy restaurants. So, sturdy shoes, thermal, fleece, waterproofs, nice warm jacket, hat, sunglasses, and gloves. Pack those and you'll be ready for anything that Icelandic weather can throw at you. Yeah, and I almost forgot. Don't forget your swimsuit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed that. I'm sure there's a few questions in the audience, perhaps, maybe. If there is, let us know. And there's a microphone in the middle there if anybody wants to ask Olaf any questions. Yes, Luke? You want to, or you can go on the mic, whichever way. I'll stay up here and protect you.
Oh, please.
You just referenced the idea of a plateau, or the need for a plateau to balance climate change and also balance residents, expectations for visitors. Like, how do you get to that plateau? So, just for example, like on Kauai, we're experiencing lots of social tourism, and as a small island, I think Iceland has a lot of room to shuffle people around, sort of spread apart. And you also have seen now where we might not have that much. So how do we get to a place where we can't continue growing tourism forever? So where do we find our plateau and how do we get there?
Well, I think it's a question of planning. As I said, it was an epiphany when I learned about planning. But I do think it is, and I think it's a question of, because at the end of the day, that will be the responsibility of politicians and governments to try and figure out how to do that. Sorry, Joy. But it will be. And one of the things that needs to be done is that you need to coordinate the different plans that you have. For example, living in an island, just as an example, people have to get here somehow. So if you have a tourism strategy which is calling for something and has a vision towards something, then, for example, you can't have an airport which is publicly funded and owned, or publicly run and owned, and not have a strategy which coincides with that also. So if you have an airport that just wants to grow, like, you know, industries like they want to do, disregarding, you know, the strategy that is in place, then you will have a problem. But that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to try and coordinate all these different planning aspects. But I think that is the work that you need to start with, because then you will have figured out where you want to go in a holistic way. And I can say this because I'm not in office anymore. And we haven't done it in Iceland, so I was critical of that.
Have you had to build more hospitals?
No. We have actually, on the drawing board, we've had a high-tech hospital for 20 years, but we're still arguing about where it's supposed to be. And this is not a joke, this is serious. I mean, it's very embarrassing. So anyway, but the strain on hospital workers has increased. But at the same time, of course, there's more revenue from the people that get sick because they have to pay somehow. I'm sorry, I'm very callous. I'm from Iceland. But I mean, but it is a strain on the hospital workers. And so, yes, that is one of the things that has to be revisited when you get an influx of temporary residents. That is the health care policy and how you run the healthcare system. So that's just one of the many aspects that needs to be looked upon.
You told us, Ms. Atladottir, that approximately 1/4 of the population, well, actually the number of tourists equals about 1/4 of the population.
Every day during the months of summer, yeah.
That's correct. Well, we have here a worse situation because we have 1/3 in the number of tourists. I mean, in 1/3 of the population. Now, when you notice that the overcrowding is a burden on your country, did you make changes in your country, like transportation? I know you wanted to decrease seasonality, but at the same time, this increase was not from one day to the other one. When you notice that the public is complaining about overcrowding, if there was any complaint at all, did you make any changes? For example, promoting or improving more neglected sites, or adding to the transportation system, or limiting the number of rental cars, or somehow some kind of restriction in order to make a balance and in order to decrease the number of tourists in certain seasons? That's my question.
Yeah. Well, there are a few incentives in place. Number one, we have the Tourism Site Development Fund, which is aimed at building up new attractions or new magnets around the country. We have an incentive to open up two regular routes, airports in the north and east of the country, but that is much more complicated than, you know, it sounds very simple, but it's really complicated. But that is at least the will of the government. And thirdly, we have the destination management planning for all the regions in the country, which is aimed at drawing people and defining the strengths of each region and drawing people to it. However, one thing that I think needs to be addressed, and which we haven't solved yet, that is the question of public transportation around the country. Domestic flights are very, very expensive, for example, and we don't have a sufficiently good public transportation system around the country, which means that everybody rents a car, which means that there's more load on the transportation system, which means that everybody starts screaming for a better transportation system. And somehow in Iceland, we've always seemed to think that all the land that goes under roads and parking places, that is miraculously the only free land in the whole country. It doesn't cost anything, you know, totally free, you know. So anyway, so those are issues that we need to address. But there are a lot of incentives in place, you know, that are aimed at opening up new areas for the tourists that are traveling around.
Aloha, thank you for coming this evening. I'm interested in jobs. You mentioned a couple of statistics regarding jobs, and I'm curious about the jobs that have been created, the quality of those jobs in terms of income and growth, personal development. You mentioned that everyone's working in the hospitality industry, so you've got to bring in people for some jobs from sustain tourism, but is there some thought to lifting the population in terms of their own ability to work and work good jobs and find career opportunities, income opportunities, that sort of thing?
Okay. As you guys know, just as well as I, there's a lot of different jobs that are created within tourism. And it turns out that when it's looked upon, we have a multitude of all sorts of jobs that have been created. High-end jobs, for example, a lot of jobs within the airline business, which are well-paying jobs that require a lot of training. But also, of course, there are the basic jobs. But I also think that we have to be very careful on how we look upon those jobs, especially because those are often the jobs that are done by the people that are moving to the country. And sometimes the people that are moving to the country are like, dentists or rocket scientists even, and they start out by working, for example, in a hotel. And I know that in Norway, they had this approach towards these jobs and the people working them, that the policy was to both treat them with respect and help them to get immersed into the society, because often these are the starting jobs. And they're very respectable jobs, even though they're not high-paying, but they're the startup where you're coming new into the job market as an Icelander or new into the country. And then you usually move on from the jobs. And it's okay if you have a lot of transition in those jobs, the menial jobs maybe, because that means that you're moving on towards maybe upwards and onwards towards other things. So that's great. So we need to take care that we don't only talk down those jobs and talk down the industry as a whole, but we have to have a very good policy on how we treat those jobs and the attitude towards them. However, the Statistics Bureau in Iceland, they did a survey on what jobs had been created, and it turned out astoundingly that because everybody talked about the low-paying jobs that were being created, but there was a lot of very good jobs that were being created also. And for example, specialized tour guides that have gone through a lot of training, and many of them, or most of them even, have a university degree in some, for example, natural sciences or cultural history. They were being specialized in all sorts of ways and having better and better wages. So it depends. I think there's a myth about the low-wage jobs, and of course there's plenty of them. But I think we have to look at that from a holistic point of view also, and maybe a more balanced point of view than we often do.
What has Iceland done so far with the two issues related? One, affordable housing in particular, and then affordable living, because the permanent residents compared to the temporary residents are at a sort of disadvantage, because the temporary residents, the tourists, travelers, are by nature a more affluent category. They have more money to spend for short periods of time, but yet they're competing for the same resources that the permanent residents are. Is Iceland still arguing about those? Plan what to do?
Yeah, we argue a lot about that. That's within the city government that we argue mostly about that, because almost everybody lives in the city. However, that is also, at the end of the day, a political question. That's why you can argue about it. Because you can either decide to develop new areas within the city, for people to buy their own houses, or you can decide to provide more affordable housing through incentives of government. And I think that, because I'm not a politician, I'm a civil servant, so I don't have an opinion on anything, ever, then I think that the current government in Reykjavik, they have been looking at both things, but specifically to try and increase the availability of affordable housing for young people. However, I was told when I was in Hawaii last year, that there was an incentive that had been in place in Honolulu where people were offered affordable housing, and people turned around and sold that to the highest bidder because they could. So that's also a question of it's also an issue that is very difficult at the end of the day to address. But maybe also, if I understand correctly, one of the things that is prevalent here in Hawaii is that everybody owns their own house. That is fairly different from, for example, the Scandinavian system where people rent a lot, and there's sort of these rental systems in place where you have house security, so you put on a deposit and then you can stay there for the rest of your life. Iceland has not gone a lot into that, but maybe that is the future, that people stop owning their houses as much as renting them, because then you can have rules in place on who lives there. I don't know.
Just one quick follow-up. You mentioned that they're doing something to provide more affordable housing for young people. Whether
Well, I think it's worked in essence, but I think the jury is still out in many ways because it takes a lot of time to build apartments. And 10 years ago, we had a lot of extra apartments because everybody had built a lot of apartments, and then we went bankrupt, so nobody bought them. So obviously, some of them were turned into hotels, which happens. And now we have a lack of housing because of the rise in tourism. But one thing that has been said sometimes is that since there are a lot of hotels being built and everybody's predicting the death of tourism next year or next week, then I, for one, have said, when I become an old person, then if all the hotels have gone bankrupt now, then probably it'll be nice, very nice old people's homes. Which then means that I can move out of my house and the young people can move in. That was a joke. But anyway, so I think the jury's out on that because that takes a lot of time. And I think this is something that will never be solved. This is something that is ongoing, and will be ongoing.
And thank you for coming. We really enjoyed the whole presentation.
Thank you.
When you showed the draft with the green about the residents and how it was overwhelmingly positive, increasing their quality of life, what would you say brought that on? I mean, was it because you were asking them and involving them and engaging them and really recognizing them as the key element to making the visitor's experience so positive? I don't know if we're doing enough of that. I'm interested to know what you folks do.
Well, I think that there is a realization, and it's only 10 years since we went bankrupt. So a lot of people, they remember how that was. And they realize that tourism has been the economic savior of the country. So even if we have a rising skepticism or criticisms of certain aspects of tourism, people do, they do realize that the economic benefit has been profound. And they also see that the jobs that have been created, many of them are really great. And also because you can't move a mountain, you bring people to it, it means that jobs are being created all around the country, and that's important. Also, I think that tourism has, in many places, brought about a higher self-awareness for small communities around the country, communities that maybe didn't think much of themselves until they sort of made a strategy which, where they looked at themselves with a guest's eye and tried to figure out characteristics that made them special. And that gives a sense of pride, which also then increases the positiveness. And I think that it's also, because people are very emotionally attached to Iceland, it maybe means that they're very proud of the fact that people come and want to visit still. But I think that's also something that we have to monitor that, because we see a rising level of skepticism, and so we need to address that.
The other part that I was interested in is when you mentioned the culture and the indigenous and authentic experience. Obviously here in Hawaii you have the native Hawaiian culture, which is very predominant and it's really wild. It's a big part of the experience that visitors come for. In your country, what is an indigenous person there? Are you?
Well, actually, I am. It's a bit embarrassing. The thing is that Iceland was settled very late, or fairly late. It was settled in at the end of the 9th century, and nobody lived there before that. There were some Catholic monks from Ireland, but I think we killed them all. And then we never told anybody about them. But so we are, in essence, the indigenous people, and we don't look very exotic. So, so it's sometimes embarrassing when they ask you about indigenous people, and you go, well, that's me.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I want to ask you something as a former biologist and naturalist, and that is talking about impacts of tourism, which are probably greater than any other single industry on the planet, and the types of tools that we use to address those. You very briefly mentioned when you started in 2010 to create your plan that you had some carrying capacity studies conducted. And I want to sort of springboard off of that and talk about, as a biologist and naturalist, limits of acceptable change. And I'm sure you know about this model for managing, particularly natural resources, but also the business experience. And I want to know how you guys have used that kind of model and then use carrying capacity as a complement, as a tool to actually address limits of acceptable change. This is something we've talked about here, but it's really never gotten any traction. And I just want to know if that's an approach that you've taken besides voluntary behavior modification, that you've really taken some hard lines on those types of impacts and how you're going to manage for those impacts, particularly at an athlete.
Well, since I was a bureaucrat, I didn't actually conduct the research myself, unfortunately. I think it was a lot of fun. But to start with, the research was mainly aimed at the societal studies. It was aimed at the visitors, the carrying capacity of them, of the residents, and it wasn't until 2014 that we managed to find funds to support some natural science carrying capacity studies. And they were mainly laying the groundwork for that. But since then, we have been developing tools to assess, changes in the environment, and we will be, Iceland will be, hopefully, will have the capacity to incorporate that into planning policies and strategic decision making, because that, at the end of the day, that is what will be done. And also, one of the things that has been discussed in Iceland, that is whether we have to limit accessibility towards certain areas at certain times. And obviously, carrying capacity studies from a natural point of view will be very important in that respect.
One more question from Joanne.
Olof, thank you so much for being here today. This topic is so current and important to us. My question is about guides. You mentioned that there's some actually high-level jobs in guides, and you also mentioned your experience with your ATV guide today. In places where I've read about tourism, they talk about the importance of training and certifying guides so that the story about the island, its history and so forth is accurate rather than a lot of myths. And so I just wondered whether Iceland has any requirements for guides in your country.
There are guide training programs, and they are according to sort of a curriculum that is sort of agreed upon from that point, from the knowledge point of view. But mainly the guides requirements are based on a safety perspective also, that they know what to do. A lot of the outdoor activity guides require a first wilderness responder course, for example, just from a safety point of view. You have specific training for those guides that go with people on glaciers. We have a mountain guide association fairly recently formed, which bases itself sort of upon the American Mountain Guide Association, because I think they have set a very good standard for that. So there are standards, and within the quality system, VAKIN, there are different standards of education and training for each sector. So we're trying to do that, but it's difficult to legislate for that also, because things change, for example, and as you know, legislation changes much more slowly than human endeavor often, or human development. So I think in that comes the responsibility of the companies also. And more companies do realize that it's very important to have a good training behind them. But also, something you can do from a legislative point of view is then we have a requirement for the guides that are, for example, working, for the companies that are working within or using a national park or a protected area or a state park as a resource in their work. So you can put rules and regulations in place for that. And that is something that is being discussed in Iceland now.
So thank you so much. Special thanks again to County of Kauai. I know George Costa's here now. George, stand up and now wave now that you're here for proof.
Nalani Brune, where are you, Nalani? She's here as well. And Diane Zachary does our tourism strategic plan. And of course, to my board chair, Paul Toner, and to the rest of you, thank you. And I have to thank my staff because, one, they stayed late tonight. Becky Sadamitsu and, of course, Lani Kauai, and helped us with getting everything set up together. So thank you so much for coming tonight. And thank you to Olof for taking the time out of her extremely busy schedule, I'll tell you. It took a lot to get her here. This may be the next time. I don't know when I'm going to see her again. So look carefully. She's on a plane tomorrow and off again. So mahalo.